It's time for Path to Power. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Ivan Yates.
And you're very welcome as we continue our countdown to the general election. We have lots of more material on our subscriber edition. I know some of you give out for me for promoting it, but we are probably capitalists, I think it's fair to say, Ivan and myself. Entrepreneurial. Although some of you have been giving me the abuse online this week about being some sort of mad lefty because of what I say about Donald Trump and Elon Musk and others. But we get away from that.
That'd be fair comment.
We get away from that largely for today's podcast. So we've so much to get through, but I want to start with, this has been such a boring general election campaign to date, as far as I'm concerned. It has not caught fire. The only thing which got a bit of a full controversy going was Michael O'Leary and the teachers. But I'm interested in hearing about this from you, Ivan, because you're a bit of a Michael O'Leary fanboy, but you're married to an ex-teacher and you are the father of a serving teacher. So come down on the side. Who you for? Michael O'Leary or the teachers?
Of course I'm for O'Leary. There's no question about that.
Why did that seem so predictable an outcome?
Well, let's see what he actually said.
Well, that's a good point.
He said, so the politics is not good for Fine Gael because there's 178,000 registered teachers and they have families, and if they're upset, it's not a good thing, and all of that.
So we have that many teachers,
yeah,
do we?
That's the register. The register of teachers.
They're not all actually working, are they?
Well,
because we have
that's a fair point.
They have shortfalls in a lot of schools.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So, and I think we're producing something like 3,000 a year as well. So there's going to be a lot more teachers. But anyway, the first thing about it is, what did he actually say? He said that teachers are wonderful, and then skipped on immediately to his punchline was that there are too many teachers in the Dáil, and that
he didn't quite express it quite that directly, but I agree with you. That's exactly what he meant. Yeah. And there's an awful lot of, and you're going to laugh at me for using the phrase, snowflakes who are trying to pretend that this was an insult to teachers doing their job teaching, which it wasn't.
In fairness. But, so is he right about the fact that teachers don't make good TDs or good ministers? So I think the point he was really making is that if you go into anything from junior infant to sixth year, all the way through the senior cycle and so on, the atmosphere in which a teacher operates is completely different to the dog eat dog, you eat what you kill environment in which the commercial world operates. And I think that's his central point. But there is no doubt that people who become career TDs, like Michael Noonan, like Enda Kenny, actually it's irrelevant what their background is, because it's their politics actually consumes their DNA, and a lot of them are hereditary. So, do
you know how many retiring TDs are teachers? When I say retired, those who were standing
half a dozen, is there?
19 of the previous Dáil were teachers.
Yeah.
19.
You see,
I started looking for, and I gave up now, I have to admit, because I could only find 2 engineers. So I'm not talking about accountants. Engineers are problem solvers.
Yeah.
And I could only find 2 engineers, and there may have been more, but
and you're going to see people who've had no previous job going straight almost from college into the Dáil, which would be sort of the situation of Simon Harris. So I actually think the Dáil is a microcosm of the population, there's all in it. What used to be the case.
So sorry, I'm sorry for interrupting you again, but in points, is it actually a microcosm? Because does it have representatives? I mean, it doesn't represent women on a 50% basis, and we see what happens as a result. So there, immediately, there's a flaw. It has almost, how many people of colour? Now that Leo Varadkar is going to be retiring from the Dáil. So how many are going to be elected? How many disabled people are elected to the Dáil? What about the age focus? If you talk about young people, do they have enough experience coming in their early 20s? Well, then should people in their late 70s be asked to leave on the basis that you've had your time? Or is it good that we have those to at least have representatives of older people in the Dáil for them? So, is it a microcosm?
You're right about that. I meant a microcosm of income strata in society. Okay. There's people who are working class, people who are middle class, and that extent, but you're absolutely right in terms of minority groups is probably underrepresented. But I'm just looking at the politics of this. So first of all, it has been a stuttering start for Fine Gael, and I would say a few errors thrown into it. The 11% VAT idea coincided with the O'Leary thing, and people say, "Oh, that's good. They've at last seen the light for the restaurant sector, hospitality sector, reducing it from 13.5 to 11." But in the small print, a lot of the 9% items were going up to 11, and Fianna Fáil were very quick to, and that would be your electricity, your energy bills. Not very clever, and in fact, as a numbers game goes, would be a vote loser. So that's the sign falling down, New Energy. So they had this podium thing, and Harris gave the table a rap or something, and the New Energy sign fell down. It was like, it reminded me of Theresa May 2017, when it was one darn thing after another, and they will be looking to stop that. And someone texted me, could this be a case of, the senior hurling county team, that a minor who was a dazzling all-star was promoted to the senior team too quick, his callow youthfulness and all this kind of thing. And actually, when you look at it, one of the differences between the Fine Gael front bench now, before you had Leo, but you had Pascal and you had Simon, there was a sense of a sort of trio of depth. Now it's all down to Harris.
Oh, sorry, there are posters going up that they have a new trio. It's Harris, Pascal Donoghue and Helen McEntee. Those are the posters that have gone up around the country as a trio.
Okay. So
but is that trio as strong as Varadkar, Pascal Donoghue and Simon Coveney was?
Yeah.
It has the benefit of having a woman in there, but is it as strong a trio?
So then we get on to the really sort of significant situation, is that Fine Gael starts sniping at Fianna Fáil.
Sorry, can we come back to that? And I'll tell you why, because there's a few things I still want to go on what you've already mentioned. The Michael O'Leary thing, I want to go back to that, because the serious point, I think, is in relation to whether we have enough people with the right levels of expertise going into various government departments. And because we discussed last week Owen Murphy and his book, Running from Office, and I know you want to talk about John Deasy, but in another context, but John Deasy has done a very interesting piece for the Business Post about Owen Murphy as well. But Owen Murphy said basically he didn't have the required experience or competence, expertise to actually be able to go in and do housing. And you do wonder as if to whether you actually need a whole variety of different people, whether ministerial appointments should really be coming from TDs is an issue for another day, what they're doing in the US. But what I want to ask you about, though, is if you look at what's happening with Trump's new administration that he's planning for the United States, and particularly DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, which I suppose in a way that it's been mocked. It doesn't just have one person running it, it is two. It's got Elon Musk and Ramaswamy when he could have just had one. But he's looking to cut up to $2 trillion out of government spending. It won't happen.
No, it won't happen.
It won't happen. But they'll make a cut of it and they'll start cutting hundreds of billions.
It's the very same as Colin McCarthy's board SNP.
Exactly.
It's not actually a statutory body. It's an advisory kind of inject, oh my God, into the system of, slash and burn, but it probably will be thwarted by the civil servants.
So, but just think about it. What if the government had lent in to what Michael O'Leary was saying? And I explained, no, they're not criticising. No, the Fine Gael couldn't, because it has too many former teachers itself. It's running former teachers and candidates. It couldn't sort of belittle the legacy of Enda Kenny and Michael Noonan. But you see, at a time when an awful lot of voters are giving out about waste, the really clever populist position for a political party to take would be to say, we need our own Department of Government Efficiency in Ireland. We need to cut loads of money that is being wasted. And that would go down very well with the electorate, except nobody can do it. Everyone's afraid to take on the teachers and the civil servants. So I'm not saying I'm advocating this. I'm just looking at would be. And you know who would be the most obvious party to do it, except they can't? Sinn Féin. It would be absolutely perfect for Sinn Féin, who are hammering away at the government in relation to waste. But Sinn Féin, because they are so committed to socialist policies and expansion of the state, they claim, well, we'll get the state to spend the money better. And, well, maybe they will, maybe they won't. But there's nobody in our political system, there is no party representing those who might think that, look at all the money that's been promised in the manifestos, the thing that's jumping out. And you want to talk about the row between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. And one of the things that came out was Pascal Donoghue having a go at Jack Donoghue for being about 5.8 billion out of kilter on his sums.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of issues there, because I believe there are 3 or 4 fundamentally dishonest assumptions into a lot of the manifestos and the political talk. I'll give you an example. Take housing. So a big housing debate, Katie Hannon Monday night, you had a debate with Owen O'Brien and so on.
And Pascal Donoghue.
So the 3 things you need for housing: you need planning, you need land, you need service land, and then go build it, right? That's what you need as a prerequisite for it. So the government said we're giving €1 billion, right, to deal with the sanitary services and water. The budget for Irish Water is completely inadequate to even build the 30,000 houses, not to speak of the 60,000 houses. And so the National Planning, the National Development Plan Board is made up of SecGens. And what has Finance, John Hogan, and what has David Maloney, the SecGen in Deeper, done? They said, well, now that billion isn't to go straight into new contracts and all the rest of it, new projects, because you'll have overheating. So they've split it 60-40.
Overheating when we have the need for all these houses.
So anyway, and they said 40% of it has to go against the debt. And so really, I find people are talking about houses and talking about building, and they've never built, a block of apartments, or they've never built a housing estate. They just have no. So what's the difference between 50, 60,000? And I think there's been huge dishonesty about that. Secondly, there's been huge dishonesty in relation to the manifestos. The manifestos are predicated on 30 billion of corporations' profits tax. There is the real prospect over the lifetime of the next government that will abate by 10 to 12 billion for arguments that we have put forward consistently, accelerated by the Trump factor.
And even if it doesn't happen, you have to prepare on the basis that it might happen. On the balance of probabilities, it is possible that it will happen.
So all these promises may be thrown in the bin at that stage if the money from the corporation tax goes down. And there is nobody saying that. And I listen to these debates and they're outbidding each other with more childcare, more subsidies, more housing spending and other. Like take the other housing issue. Okay, so we're going to build 60,000 houses a year. The cost of it is, and I heard you in the debate, you actually had figures from the consultant Mitchell and...
Oh yeah, but the cost of an apartment to build...
Was it 592,000 or something like that?
Yeah.
Well, we'll just call it 400,000. To build 60,000 will cost 24 billion. They're all making a big issue. Oh my God, I'm going to spend 8 billion of public money on housing next year. Sorry, mate, where's the other 16 billion?
Well, that's why I was pressing them on the issue. What's your role for what you like to call the vulture funds or the cuckoo funds? But these institutional funds are essential to actually
And not only that.
And that means as well, they also, if they're going to build, want to build rental properties.
And
so
the rent freeze and the no-fault eviction ban, Ivana, Holly, sorry, have you spoken to these people? Do you realise they're not going to invest the 16 billion? They're going to go to the UK. And so the fact of the matter is, and I've met these companies from Heinz and so on, and all they are people who can deliver you scale.
But go back to this issue of the civil servants and saying, oh, there's $1 billion extra for water, but actually you can only spend 600 million of it. You have to put the other 400 million into debt. Who runs the country? I mean, is it the civil servants or is it the politicians that we elect? And it comes back again to this thing, as I said, I mean, the Elon Musk approach. And, I think the idea that they have over there of sort of gutting the public sector, public service is largely for regulation, again, things like that, things that inhibit Musk. But there has to be waste which needs to be eliminated. And coming back to the point that I said that people would like to see waste eliminated. So Sinn Féin previously, Owen O'Brien made comments a couple of years back about removing an economist in the Department of Finance. He didn't agree with it. And then he was forced to apologise and back down. How dare you? Sorry, hold on a second. Surely a government coming into power should have the power to actually decide what civil servants it wants to work with. And if the civil servants are obstructing the democratically elected people who want to implement certain policies, then surely the civil servants should be moved aside.
Well, you see,
that's what happens in any business.
No, and that's a very fair comment insofar as these Secretary Generals, maybe it's a good thing they never look for a vote, but the idea is you have the SPADs, the special advisors, who are the intermediary, who go when the minister's fired, and they come when a new minister arrives, and their job is to persuade the permanent government to do things. But just one other thing that I think that is confusing people that we've been dishonest about. So here we have the government saying, well, actually, we've built 125,000 units in the last 4 years. And people would have to say, well, that is a bit of an improvement in fairness. But then when you saw last night Colette Fitzpatrick putting Simon Harris under the torch, right?
Wasn't it? It was possibly the most difficult interview he has ever experienced. And fair play to Colette Fitzpatrick. She stuck at it.
So I was actually in Carly yesterday teaching people about media management. And one thing I say is, when you have Ryan Tubridy interview, he'll ask you 6 questions and he'll move on to the 4th, 5th and 6th. And it's easy because if you're prepared, your answer. Vincent Browne was the really difficult B, which would ask the same question 6 times. So you have your answer and then you have 2 or 3 deflections. But if he keeps at it, you look at it. And so what came out of that interview is, so here we have a growing population and we've all these pressures on accommodation. And why has the homeless figure gone up if we've built all these? And Harris came straight out with it. In February 22, we decided to facilitate 106,000 Ukrainians. We now have 25,000 international provision people coming. And you know what? The Ukrainians decided they're going to stay. And so therefore, and I came across 2 cases. One, there's an exemption for planning if you want to build a migrant centre. But I met a landlord who just had one property. Their mother lived in a flat and it became vacant. And they were getting 1,200 rent for it, right? Which they had to pay marginal tax on of €600 tax as an income. Right?
Yeah.
If you take in a Ukrainian, you get 800 a month, but it's tax-free.
So you're 200 quid better off.
So the point I'm trying to make is that we made an emergency facility planning exemption and tax-free rent for the Ukrainians. Sorry, why didn't we do that for the homeless?
Very good question.
The point is, the state finds ways of doing it. But the other thing is just look at the numbers. 106,000. If they have to be living somewhere in Ireland, and I'm not coming down the Ukrainians, but in retrospect, that pressure over the last 2 years on accommodation in Ireland explains how, as Colette said, it's never been worse in terms of scarcity of accommodation, and at the same time say, well, we've never built more.
Yesterday on The Last Word, we had Peadar Tóibín of Aontú debating with Colin Brophy of Fine Gael on immigration. And one of the things that was very interesting, I thought, that Peadar Tóibín said is that as well as having the people coming from Ukraine and we had those seeking international protection, we have lots of other people coming into the country from within the EU and also outside the EU who get work permits because they fill jobs that would not necessarily be filled in Ireland by Irish people. And this is particularly in the tech
And that's all
sector.
legal migration.
Absolutely. Sorry. But he actually was looking for limits on the issue of permits and visas. Because his argument
that's crazy.
Was... Let me just give you the argument, because I did point out to him that we need the people to fill these jobs for continuing the corporation tax revenues and to fill the jobs that wouldn't otherwise be filled. But his view was, and I wonder will this catch a little bit of attention from voters, is that that's all fine and well, but you actually have a finite supply of houses. We can't keep up with the demand for houses. They have pressure on hospitals, pressure on the schools. So do we actually...
And in the private sector. There's all sorts of shortages there.
Do we actually need to consider that we actually have to try and put some type of lid on the amount of immigration coming in because our public services and our housing cannot cope?
Well, put it like this, the pressure that I receive is that more categories of workers should be put into the essential worker thing. In other words, people say there's a shortage of planners. We could get them from Canada and New Zealand here, and actually all the pressure is not to cap it at 31,000, because it was 45,000. It's actually to get more people with skills.
But then where are they going to live?
Well, put it like that. Well, obviously all these pressures are coming together. The other point I didn't answer...
Sorry, it's a very relevant question.
Oh, absolutely.
Where are they going to live?
Well, the situation is that in a market economy, they will be able to afford more rent than people who are in. And let's be clear. Any politician who says to anyone in the audience who is in emergency accommodation, the notion that you're going to get a free house is something that is going to be limited. Right? There's nobody saying, like, there is a limit to how many free houses can be provided.
And of course, the other thing is there's an awful lot of people who don't like the idea of people getting free houses.
Absolutely. I mean, and there's no one actually representing them in the spectrum of whatsoever. But I want to come back to the issue you raised. In Britain, they have the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, and they vet everything in a strict way. Like the Department of Finance vetting is a joke, actually, insofar as that they like you can get away with a cut on the USC of 1.8 billion. Yeah, that's fine. We're paying for that through, some surcharge on people over 140 grand, all of which is nonsense. The point I'm trying to make is this. We have seen that so we don't have an equivalent. We have IFAC, which is the Fiscal Advisory Council, who have been absolutely ignored in their warnings about the temporary nature of corporation tax. But I actually think the public are being sold a pup. Every morning we have from every party all these press conferences, and all of them, cost money. And there is nobody saying there's a health check here. Not only are they trying to buy you money with your own vote with your own money, but also that the sums don't add up. And I'm accusing them all of that. But I want to get back to the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael thing.
Yeah, I very much want to get back to as well. But the thing that interests me as well, the thing that's really come across in the post-election analysis from the United States is that inflation and the cost of living was the major issue for many, many voters. Coming down to the sense that even as prices fell back, people are still annoyed about the fact that they're higher than they were 2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
People don't
Electricity 60% higher than 2020.
People, and this is absolutely makes common logical sense, is that people aren't necessarily appreciative of the fact that prices aren't going up anymore. They're still annoyed, stuck with the prices that they're having to pay, and they, particularly if their income in the interim period hasn't increased by as much. But I wonder, given that incumbent governments are falling all over the world,
Without exception.
Exactly, yeah. And yet, a lot of the conversation is, according to the opinion polls, that Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil will get back into power and may not necessarily need a third leg. They might be able to get back as a minority government or even with a majority. How much of that is going to be down to that they have managed to give money to everybody to mitigate electricity bills, for example, putting up child benefit and things like that, making promises like Fine Gael are of a double child benefit payment in August for people going back to school, that when people who have children now that they're availing of free book schemes and whatever. Has the government perhaps done enough with the tax money that it had at its disposal to effectively mollify the public and protect and insulate itself in a way that governments throughout the world didn't have the money to do?
Yeah. And I just, so 4 billion was spent on cost of living measures, and we're going to find out, my old phrase, money can't buy you love. We're going to find out if it can buy you an election.
Astound them with your ingratitude.
Exactly.
My favourite phrase.
So that is possible. So I think for an election at a high level, you've got to see which narrative is the people go for. So just take Trump. Trump's narrative was, you're worse off, the immigrants are a problem and they've been fast and loose with the border, and I am going to make America great again through tariffs and isolation. That was one narrative. The other narrative was, actually the economy is going through a very difficult time with COVID and Ukraine and so on. We're actually managing that well. We're doing the right thing by the people of Ukraine and on other liberal issues like abortion. And so therefore you have competing narratives, right? And which narrative won? It was quite clear. Now, what is the competing narrative here? And this is why the sniping between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil is just so idiotic. So the narrative should be, for both Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, is this: Irish politics is very fragmented. It's actually going to be very hard to form a government. But when you put Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil together, they have a core of 40%, and they will provide a stable government instead of a hodgepodge of independents and splinter parties.
I'd say they'd like to think it's 45 rather than 40%, okay. But anyway, and so therefore, it may not be.
They should be saying the central question, overriding every policy issue, every promise is, do you want this government with its central cohort of F and FG to continue, or do you not? Do you go for the Sinn Féin narrative, 100 years of civil war politics, 14 years of Fine Gael? And that is the question that voters have to answer. By this bickering between them, they're actually distracting from that central question, which I feel they can win. 40-20, I think there will be 20% plus of the electorate just want rid of FFG and want radical change. But I don't believe that is a question a majority of people would say yes to.
Okay, a couple of things. I was actually chatting to a friend of mine yesterday at the Irish Journalism Awards. I won't identify him because I don't want to necessarily identify the person he was talking about. But this work colleague of his, he said one of his greatest strengths, he said, is that you can have a blazing row with him, and 5 minutes later, he's forgotten it. It's all forgiven, right? And he says it comes from this guy, elite sports background. The sort of the harsh things said in the dressing room. You get stuck in, you have the row, and it's dealt with, and it's over. I wonder, temperamentally, are a lot of the senior figures in Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil like that? Or will a lot of the stuff that has been said, in the heat of this election battle, fester if they do get back into power with each other?
Well, let's look at what has been said. Okay, so in fairness, the sniping has been a little bit mutual. It's been a little bit more personalised from Fine Gael and a little bit more, I would say, bitchy. But the central allegation, Pascal issued a statement saying, after the Fianna Fáil manifesto was published, that it makes assumptions of tax growth on a no policy change basis of 5.2 billion, and that this is magic tree money and it's false. To which Jack Chambers replied, well, that's what has happened in every one of the last 6 budgets that you've been involved with, Pascal. It's no different. The Department of Finance, because of growth in the economy and no policy change basis, that's what they call the white paper that's published the weekend before the budget. So the sniping on the other side is also Fianna Fáil have been saying, we're not really happy about the number of Gardaí. There's a lot of antisocial behaviour, and of course it isn't. We want the Justice Department next time. In fact, we're going to go further and have a Department of Domestic Affairs, which I think is a cracking good idea. By the way,
is that why Helen McEntee was also out like Pascal Donoghue attacking the Fianna Fáil manifesto and talking about a 2011 style economics, that she has been maybe bristling a little bit about how Micheál Martin in particular has been targeting the issue of the streets not being safe in Cork and in Dublin and other places, that this was her chance to put the stiletto in.
So I can explain why this is happening, because it defies logic in terms of the national air war. But when you get down to Kerry, it's Billy O'Shea versus Michael Cahill of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. In Dublin Northwest, it's Noel Rock against Paul McAuliffe. They won't both be elected. And I could bring you through in Meath West. It's Aisling Dempsey versus Linda Murray of Fine Gael, the replacement for Damien English. And so therefore, winner takes all. Once one goes out in the count, they will elect the other. So there are huge tensions on the ground between Fine Gael and Fine, and they're based on reality.
We need to take a break. We'll be back with lots more in this edition of Path to Power after this. Welcome back. Let's carry on, Ivan, with our election conversation. I just want to go back to the electricity and VAT as well for a moment, because I wonder if the government is going to have to make almost permanent these electricity payments every year, even though they cost an enormous amount of money. What was it? About 800 million this year. I could be wrong. That's just off the top of my head. But now we're down to, was it €125 a bill or whatever it is that everybody gets, whether they need it or not. But there was Danny McCoy writing in the Business Post last week.
I'm just coming to that. I have
and
it here.
Cormac Lucy writing in the Sunday Times, both writing about how the price of electricity in Ireland is wildly expensive by EU standards, completely out of kilter. This is very bad for the competitiveness and productivity of industry, but also for the individuals in their homes. They're paying way more than they should. So is it that to compensate for that, the state is going to have to continue giving these refunds every year?
And I just want to drill down a little bit into what Danny said. I think that Cormac was making a case against offshore wind.
He was strong case,
but the case Danny was making was this, that if the government, not for householders, for business, for manufacturing business, was to have what he called a strategic annual subvention of 600 million, it would reduce fixed costs on energy bills, and this is 10.7% in terms of their total costs. And it is another factor for FDI. But like this, I don't think, like, if the Department of Finance can stop what was the political intention. And I should just say, Pascal is supposed to be chairing these National Development Board meetings. Maybe he's so busy on the hustings, he's not seeing what these civil servants are doing. But if they can thwart what politicians want in this, by God, they'll thwart making these sticking plaster solutions permanent.
Well, go back to the 11% VAT that we mentioned at the outset, because I think that deserves a little bit more time in relation to it, because again, is it a little bit too clever by half for two reasons. One is that my understanding, I think under EU rules, you can only have two rates of VAT, or three. You can have zero VAT, and then you can have two other levels. And ours that we've chosen are 13.5% and
the 23% is the top rate. Yeah.
And we had a temporary derogation, an exemption for certain things to allow for 9%. If VAT at 11% was introduced, does it not look like the entire 9% would have to come up to 11%?
That's it.
Now, doesn't that look like a massive own goal by the government to actually effectively be introducing something that would make an awful lot of important services more expensive to people? So that's the first point in relation to, and the second point in relation to VAT.
And it's not just, the 13.5, things like hairdressing salons, all those services who are labour intensive, your coffee shops and all that kind of thing, they would be beneficiaries, but you can clearly see other consumers would be losers.
Yeah, and then I think even those who will benefit from it are incredibly cynical about it. The majority of people that I've spoken to who have gone like, well, why didn't they do this in the last budget? And isn't this one of the weaknesses for Fine Gael and Labour? Making an awful lot of these...
Fianna Fáil.
Sorry, Fianna Fáil, excuse me.
Poor Labour.
Yes, I don't know where that one came from, but sorry, yes. But isn't it one of the major weaknesses for Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil is just having brought in a budget in which they said they couldn't do certain things, now they're promising that they will do it. Isn't that the type of thing that gets the voters going, come on?
And not only that, nearly every party's had, this first 100 days, they're going to do this and that. They've all promised a mini budget in what will have to be, well, actually, we don't know when the government will be formed, but within 100 days of it being formed. I put it like this. I think the strategists in FF and FG just need to have a little chat and say, sorry.
Cool the jets?
No, not only cool the jets, there's a tolerable level of sniping, and that is on the ground war, not at national level.
Well, talking of sniping, let's go to Sinn Féin. So how well do you think has it been doing in pushing its agenda?
Well, you see, I come at this from a different point of view, and that is that I think the major paradigm within which, and prism within which this election is looked at, do you want to continue with FFFG or do you not? And therefore, for those who don't, right, your main choice, if you're absolutely opposed to government, is Sinn Féin or People Before Profit. Because there's no day, no way that they'll go in with each other, with Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil. Whereas Labour or Soc Dems might. And they have the benefit, and the Greens, of getting transfers on both sides. If a Fine Gael candidate goes out, Fianna Fáil candidates, or if a left-wing candidate goes out, that's why they're keeping an each-way bet open. But when you go through the 5-seat constituencies, there will be one guaranteed anti protest FU vote seat.
Some of which will go to independents.
So if you go through the constituencies, that's a fair point. But I think that there is a natural constituency of what would be complete protest votes for Sinn Féin of about 30.
Okay.
But that doesn't get you to 45.
You see, it's funny because an awful lot of the argument seems to be stability as against change. And if Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are tearing lumps out of each other, that doesn't necessarily do great for the suggestion of stability if they were to return to government. But I suppose the stability is something they're talking about, economic measures. It's different for Sinn Féin. What do you make Sinn Féin as well? Mary Lou MacDonald did a podcast with Joe Brolly and Dion Fanning, and she said that the establishment in the South needs to stop asking Sinn Féin about the actions of the IRA in the past and stuff as if that is irrelevant. Is it irrelevant when you have still candidates who have an IRA past, and when you have, I suppose you could even say, more recent issues such as the murder of Paul Quinn in 2007, which we have never had satisfactory answers about, despite widespread speculation as to who was involved in that absolutely savage murder?
I think, the Good Friday Agreement's there since 98. This election, and the real imponderable is what will young voters do? And I always say, it's very hard for Ivan to know when the young voters haven't made up their mind who they're going to vote for. But what Mary Lou does best, she did it fantastically in 2020, and she started the narrative again. So you see, Sinn Féin voters are second-class citizens. It's like...
They won't dare talk to us about going into coalition.
It's like
they're insulting our communities, how we come from.
It's the garbage deplorables argument in reverse.
Yeah.
You're calling us all these, even though they haven't done that, you're ostracising it. So what Mary Lou does best is victimhood. Right? And she's playing that card again. And good luck to her. You know, if you're in election, you've got to play every card you can. What I just want to say to you, Matt, and this is the point that you're missing, and we'll come back perhaps in the next episode, the subscriber episode, to just how accurately John DC articulated the relationship between voters and a TD and why Fine Gael have a problem. So, 50% of voters, you can have all what I call the air war, radio, TV, print and all the rest of it. They're just voting for their local TD. What's the basis of that selection? Number one, do I know him? Do I know the her? And is it near to me? Local. You're not going to vote for someone 50 miles away, okay? Nextly, it's like in Monkstown, there's a row of 5 restaurants. And you can act, they're very good quality restaurants. So whatever flavour you want. So that is the party element of. Secondly, they're looking for who is the most visible, kicking over the traces and who is the most energetic, who's the most effective, who's likely to be a minister. And then after that, likeability. Who would I go for a pint with? Who would I say, how are you at the match or, at the races or whatever? And then there's family connections. And all of that, is about 50% of people, and it's perfectly valid, but it's a reality. And so therefore, a lot of the analysis, this is how Healy-Rae does it. You know what I mean? He ticks every one of those boxes. He's adjacent to them. It's whatever you're having yourself in terms of policy. Run with the hare, out with the sound. He's visible. He's energetic.
That's Michael.
Yeah.
But there are some people suggesting Danny might have a fight in his hand to get re-elected.
Don't think so. Don't think so. Again, my feeling of Kerry is that the Fine Gael, and I actually was in touch with the Director of Elections, who's a good friend of mine, Michael Finucane, former TD in my day, in Limerick West at that time, and he's Director of Elections. I'm just hearing the councillors for Fine Gael. It's a long way from Listowel down to Tarbert and
it's a massive
Kenmare, Cloughlin, all that kind of thing. So Billy O'Shea is from Cloughlin. He's an auctioneer in a pub there. His name has never been on a ballot paper before. He was captain.
He has an All-Ireland medal, though.
Yeah, 1997. But they are like snuff at a wake in terms of everyone in Kerry has an All-Ireland medal.
Oh, not the way it used to be. Not the way it used to be, Ivan.
Well, that's only a Cork.
And I say this
that's
is
only
a Cork
man speaking. Okay. No, he was captain of Lone Rangers, and I'm not going to take his footballing pedigree. And there is a GAA network which is supporting him. But what I'm saying is this, that if Brendan Griffin was running, I wouldn't be wasting any time to say, yes, it's a seat. But I'm looking at the divide for Fianna Fáil. In the north, you have Norma Foley, and him in the south, Michael Cahill. He's never been on a general election ballot paper, but he's 25 years and more a councillor and is sort of liked. I think the two Healy-Raes, Pa Daly from Tralee, Norma. So the last seat is up for grabs. And, we do have a sort of rule over 100 years of this state. 80% of incumbents hold their seat. So that the 4 seats are predictable.
We'll go back to the John Deasy article from the Business Post, because I think this comes back to, it's holding seats. And he's going back into how many seats that Fine Gael don't have a returning TD to, isn't it? That's his point, that this is going to be very difficult for Fine Gael to pick up seats because they don't actually have the ground troops. Or does it matter? Because there's another argument to this thing put forward to counter that, is that Sinn Féin picked up loads of seats in 2020 despite having absolutely no ground battle warriors available to them. It was simply people voted by proxy for Mary Lou McDonald, and Fine Gael are hoping that people will vote by proxy for Simon Harris.
Let me tell the listeners or viewers how this podcast works. So Matt sent me late last night 83 pages of SH1T. But in amongst it, his back articles and the Mail, his back pages in
lots
the
of things
Sunday
from other
Business
people
Post,
as well,
which actually I have to read and then say, look, that's 10 minutes of my life I won't get back again. But in amongst this you did send me a nugget. And I just want to quote from a few lines of this John Deasy, which was a once-off article. The first thing, like Austin Deasy was a complete Marmite. That's his father. Yeah. He's a complete Marmite politician. And he said...
Who became Minister for Agriculture,
Oh, totally, totally.
Yeah. One of your predecessors.
Yes, that's right. And this is a lovely line. As your father's son in politics, you inherit half his friends and all his enemies. I said, I understand that fully. Okay? So then he goes on to say about the relationship between a TD and so on. With a good manner and an effective constituency office, they usually build up a bank of constituent trust and loyalty. Done right, it becomes an intimate and personal connection. People become familiar with you and personally indebted to you. And yes, he goes on to say, much as that awful thing called political clientelism, you hear high-minded journalists, a.k.a. Matt Cooper.
No, he didn't say that. You're adding that in.
I'm ad-libbing that. You know, people who think they know politics. Much as you hear high-minded journalists, I think it must be you, he had in mind there, giving out, Ireland is a small country and it's how politics works the world over and will never be any different. As a result, Fine Gael are at greater risk of losing seats in constituencies where the retiree has fashioned a strong personal vote. And I thought that was really smart. And then he went on to make this point. Normally, the supporters of the retiring TD wouldn't warm themselves to help the rookie candidate because in some cases they were fighting against that rookie, you know. So, you know, you take someone like Deirdre Heaney, right? She would have been fighting with Sean Haughey in a different party in Fianna Fáil. And so are all the Haugheyeites going to support Deirdre Heaney having spent 20 years opposing her? So that's the kind of complexity in a succession game.
And given what he has expressed there, would that suggest that the cleverer bet is for Micheál Martin rather than Simon Harris to be the next Taoiseach? That Fianna Fáil will win more seats than Fine Gael, even if the opinion polls, and again, you know, I take opinion polls with a large grain of salt, are suggesting Fine Gael more popular nationally. When you get into the individual constituencies, that Fianna Fáil might win more seats than Fine Gael.
So, when we were analysing the
this is all the work you're doing with Sean Defoe.
I'm calling it, and it's going. It is the bane of my life. I've got 16 more to do, and I actually the amount of texting. We'll deal with that in the other podcast. But on the point of which party will get the most seats. And you would generally deride me when I refer to Stuart Kenny in terms of the American election. You know, what's the story here? And he's thinking through his pocket and all of that good stuff. And Trump is going to win, and Trump is going to win, and Trump did win. He's the cute boy. Because I've been saying for about 18 months that Fianna Fáil would be the largest party because of the succession problem. He's backed Fianna Fáil to be the large party at 7-1. It's now even money. 11-10. Fine Gael were 4-7 when the election was called to be the largest party. But, of course, those odds compilers haven't got into the weeds of this, the granular detail of it. And because of the succession situation, in some cases, like, you know, they might win a seat they didn't have, like in Waterford with John Cummins. They might win a seat in Tipperary with Michael Murphy, Fine Gael, that they didn't have before. But there are lots of seats that are in real jeopardy. Donegal gone, Kerry in trouble, and so on.
Okay. Do you think the Simon Harris's interview with Colette Fitzpatrick matter much? I mean, I wonder how many people will have seen it. But then you will also have clips.
The social media. Yeah.
And this is, I think this is the other point that perhaps we need to actually address, is that how many people will actually be watching interviews like that on television or listening to interviews on radio, or will only consume the carefully crafted extracts, some of which will be put out that are favourable by the parties themselves, but opponents will put out the ones where there are gaffes or where there are mistakes, which may get extra traction. And when you add to that I think Sinn Féin is outspending the other parties 4-1 when it comes to social media advertising, based on what we saw in the American election, where the Democrats were boasting about their so-called ground game and knocking on doors, how much of it is that actually in the 21st century, it's the memes and it's the little viral clips and things like that that could actually be
like
much
the
more
sign
important.
falling down. But
yes.
Yeah, exactly. But I would like to spend a moment looking at the structure of the media platform, the traditional media. So,
of which you are part.
Oh, no, I'm not. No, please, don't wash your mouth there.
Sorry.
No, how dare you?
Are you not?
I'm not. I'm not a journalist, and B, I'm not I'm into podcasting. If you hadn't noticed.
Sorry, are you not? Are you not doing stuff for News Talk?
I know. I'll do stuff for every media on the count stuff. But sorry. The point I'm trying to make is this. So on Monday night, God love Katie Hannon. She's going to have 10 people. Who thought it was a good idea to say that Joan Collins should be, whose seat in Dublin South Central is not certain and represents a very small group of people, should be included with party leaders? Whoever decided that have put Katie in an impossible position because A, it's a shout fest. B, there's no substantive scrutiny of issues. And I would actually say, in fairness to Virgin Media, they probably accidentally came across this because of lack of resources, the reduction of the Tonight Show and so on. A 1 hour interview is a lot more stress testing, due diligence of our political leaders than any shoutfest. Because the best you can do is come up with a one-liner. You know, that's the best you can do. There is no serious analysis of complex issues. So I actually think the media have done us a disservice. Now, so you chair debates, right? You mediate debates. How many do you think is the maximum that should be on any debate to not have them shouting over each other?
4 is the maximum.
I think 3 is nearly.
Well, no, see, if you go for 3, well, yeah, it can be 4, ideally. 3, I can understand it. I mean, particularly if you're talking about leaders, you would say that, well, you know, you've only got 3 who have potential to be Taoiseach. This goes back to the argument in 2020. It's leaders of Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin. Now, you could say that in a 3-person debate, is it unfair that you're loaded 2 against 1, given that 2 would rotate the Taoiseach if they go back into coalition like the way they've done it in the past? And is that unfair to Mary Lou McDonald? Or actually, is it to Mary Lou McDonald's benefit because it looks like the other 2 are ganging up on her? You can conduct an interview, I think, or conduct a debate with 4 people. Like we did it a number of times on television together in referenda. And I think, if I remember rightly, I'm trying to remember which one, didn't we have Leo Varadkar and Mary Lou McDonald together during the abortion referendum up against
it was a good debate, actually.
Declan Ganley and who else was it? I'm trying to remember who else it was.
There were substantive points.
And it was and it was possible for us to moderate it with 4 people. I think when you go beyond 4, it becomes very... and we've actually decided, and based on the last word, what we've been doing in the radio debates is 2. And we just
I agree with that.
And we it's much easier.
My point is, there is a conflict of interest between inclusion and fairness on one side and proper due diligence and scrutiny of the issues. And RTE, in terms of television, in my view, have favoured the inclusion argument, which means that the public get a raw deal in terms of you can just have some good sound bites and you don't have necessarily the substantive arguments.
As entrepreneurial capitalists, even if you like to sort of conflate the whole woke left-wing agenda with me, we are keeping some of our material for the subscriber podcast.
All the gossip.
Well, yes, I was going to say
and the mails.
Nearly all the gossip and the emails that we've had in. I also want to talk about Robbie Keane's wife, Claudine.
And I want to talk about Conor McGregor. And I want to tell you that the AK-47 is locked and loaded.
Okay, give listeners one piece of gossip for free. Go on.
Okay. You've sort of caught me on the hop here.
Take a minute. Well, compose yourself while I talk.
Okay, I'll give you one bit of gossip. One bit of gossip. The closing date for nominations is Saturday.
Yeah.
And my eyes will be firmly fixed on the returning officer for the Wicklow-Wexford constituency, because it's a no-brainer. Fianna Fáil, between Malcolm Byrne and Pat Kennedy, will get 1 seat, and Brian Brennan for Fine Gael will get another seat. Who will get the last seat? Because I don't think either party can get 2. That's in a 3-seater, it's very, very hard to get 2. And there is a few independents there and a Sinn Féin candidate who sort of didn't do great in the local elections. Certainly you couldn't say they'll get 5,000 or 6,000 votes. And let's be clear, Art O'Leary made a dog's dinner of this. 35,000 people from Wexford feeling disenfranchised, 25,000 people from Wicklow feeling they're not with their native county. Well done, Art.
Can I just say to you, Art, that we think you're absolutely excellent at your job.
But this was the one F-up he did.
That is Ivan's opinion. In this particular case, it's a dog's dinner. And given that we're into freedom of expression and freedom of opinion, so I hope you appreciate that he will have a bit of go at you on one thing, right?
The bit of gossip is, will Mick Wallace, yes or no, stand in Wexford? The bit of gossip is that he's definitely not going to stand in Wexford, but he might stand in Wicklow, Wexford, where there is a ready-made opportunity for an anti-government seat.
By the time this podcast is heard, we might know the answer to that, but it's a nice one for you to bring up. Okay, we have lots more to get through on the subscriber edition. Thank you very much to Aidan and Tom for producing here today. So we look forward to talking to you again and keeping in touch with all of what's going on in the general election campaign. Thank you for listening. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Evan Yates.
Thank you and goodbye.